Cool. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I appreciate you all being here today, especially on a very cold morning. um, I'm going to be teaching you guys today DevOps for developers. And this is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. I am a content creator, and this is something I deal with and create content around every single day. I also do it professionally, so I'm very excited to share this with you. Mostly because of the main title, An Introduction to DevOps for Developers and its purpose in software development. The main goal that I really want people to be able to take away from this is to be able to confidently go into DevOps at any organization and simply be able to start applying some of the fundamentals and the practices that I'm going to be sharing with you guys today. So let's get started. So as an introduction, my name is Eric Reinert. I'm also known as Black Glasses on the interwebs. I'm a senior software engineer. I currently work at a company called Hippo, but I've worked at a few other companies in the past like that. As I said, I'm a content creator. We are the Alt of 4 stream on Twitch and YouTube. And I'm basically obsessed with problem solving. One of the things that I started realizing very quickly, especially about what I do, is where my passions lie with it, and kind of how that plays a role in my job. And so, yeah, one of the things that is really, really big to me is problem solving. To give a further background, I've kind of done a lot of different things. I started out my career in front end, and I did that for about 2 years. And I really got off actually a CS floor with that. So I was taking phone calls. And I had an opportunity where I started building stuff on the CS floor. They started recognizing that, and they were like, hey, we might have an engineer here. And so they actually took me out of customer support and into front end, where I started my career. And that first 2 years was really focused on building front ends for enterprise companies. I worked at a company at the time called Media Temple. You guys may have heard of it. It's a web hosting company. And my job was really focused on making buttons clickable. And that was definitely a part of my life for quite some time. And as much fun I had with it, I started realizing that front end might not be exactly my true passion in life. After that, I decided I was just going to start following my curiosity. I didn't really know how to get to the job I wanted or my dream job, but I knew that if I followed my curiosity, I could hopefully get there. And so from there, I took 2 years into back end. I actually just jumped to a completely different company. I said, I feel like doing backend now. And so I took that and I ran with that. I started building backends for a iOS mobile app. And another thing too is I jumped into it with very little knowledge. A lot of what I have focused on has really been around my curiosity around things and using that as something to kind of guide me. As you do when you start dealing with backend and stuff like that, I think it's very common for a lot of people to start getting fascinated with other parts of the stack or the whole entire stack. You know what I mean? You conquer front end in some regard, and then you get to back end, and you're like, okay, I can do it all. And I thought I could too. And so I actually took another job after that for about 2 years, where I started working in full stack. And this is really, I think, where I started experiencing as an engineer what DevOps felt like. Because in that scenario, with full stack, you're getting closer to owning much more of the actual, bottom up, all of it. And that really started opening up new opportunities for me in the sense of where I was troubleshooting the stack in a different way that I'd never done before. I was looking at the stack in a different way. I wasn't compartmentalized to just one thing. I wasn't just focused on front end. I wasn't just focused on back end. I was starting to do both. However, I again followed my curiosity and started realizing that one of the things I loved about this was just problem solving. I loved being able to look at the entire stack and say, like, okay, here's where I can be super helpful, or here's where we can try and solve this problem, and things like that. And again, I started out my career moving to Los Angeles as a writer and director, and then somehow ended up in engineering and doing what I do now. So none of this was planned. None of this was something I expected to even do. And again, I followed my curiosity of problem solving with that. And so I had a friend actually who works in DevOps, and he was like, hey, you might be interested in looking at problems from a much more higher organizational level than just a specific product or things like that. And so I did it again. I moved to a different company, and when I moved to that different company, I had an opportunity to readdress my title. And so I was like, you know what? I've already done front end, I've already done back end, and I've done full stack now. Why don't we try DevOps? And yeah, it was incredible. I never thought that I would, especially so early in my career, be so passionate about something that I really love doing. And there's reason to why I'm sharing this too. There's a couple of reasons. The first off is that DevOps is definitely a collection of knowledge over a period of time. It is not, in some regard, something that is just, you pick up a book and you start reading about it. Even this course is, as much as I'm going to try and get you guys understanding what DevOps is, a lot of it is still just going to be experience. So when we talk about getting into DevOps, I'm not saying you need to have 8+ years before you go into it. But what I am saying is that, just showing from my own path, my own course, it helps. It helps a lot, especially when, you've got crazy circumstances that you're in. So let's go ahead and let's actually dive into DevOps now. And before we do that, I really want to note that in this slide here, basically, that we're going to be starting from scratch. Yep.
If you have an interest in DevOps, would you recommend it for somebody who's entering into the field or entering into tech in general?
Okay, so I do. I think one of the things that a lot of engineers do really quickly is they doubt themselves. They look at these things, these massive obstacles of, oh, I want to go into ML, or oh, I want to go into this. I don't think that it's not possible for you to go in DevOps, especially if you're just entering the industry. I think the thing that you have to be open-minded is just you're not going to know everything. There are people who are, even if they're not in DevOps, are going to be able to walk up to a problem and simply solve it quicker because they've been through it. So, I definitely think it's possible. I think it's, again, it's going to be more of a learning experience before you start getting comfortable with, maybe the company you're at, the stack you're dealing with, and things like that. Mm-hmm.
It's a good habit to just check for questions when you kind of complete a section.
Okay.
If you want to start from the start of this again,
sure.
Where you were going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, we're going to dive into DevOps, but we're really going to start from scratch with it. And again, the big point here is that I want to basically make you unlearn everything you know about DevOps. There's a really great quote that I know from a musician that I'm not going to say so I don't get judged about it. But the quote is good, which is, for you to understand me, you first have to unlearn everything about me. And that's just the common scenario of, we're so used to like tabloids and other things like that. It's hard to understand maybe, somebody, your idol or something like that, because you're just not getting the real picture, And I realize that that's kind of DevOps right now. There's a lot of things out there that are kind of misleading. And so I really want to start from scratch. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to give you, for starters, the more, like watered down version of it, but it is pretty the straightforward version of it is, to enter a career in DevOps, it is helpful to have an experience in both software development and IT operations. This may include experience with coding and scripting languages, as well as experience with systems administrations and infrastructure management. Again, I'm not saying that this is a requirement. It's helpful, right? Having a strong understanding of collaboration and communication tools, methodologies such as Agile and Lean principles can be beneficial. Again, not required, but beneficial. It is also important to have a passion for continuous learning and staying up to date with the latest technologies and best practices in the field. So, as I just said, right, before we even got to this introduction, by kind of shaping my career path and my interests, you might be able to start seeing why I'm so interested in DevOps and things like that. You can definitely take the knowledge that you have and apply it to problem solving at a much higher level. And again, it's not a circumstance where you need to know, everything about a specific language. We're not talking about that here. What we're talking about is that we just need to know that if a service is down and it's written in Go or JavaScript or whatever, hopefully you can debug that. That's kind of the job that we need, we need to be able to do. And again, I think the last part is really important. It's important to have passion for continuous learning. We live in an industry right now that is so fast and updating constantly that if you're not staying up to date with either practices, principles, strategies, things like that, you might realize that you're doing old things that have been improved upon 10, 15 years ago, and you're just still doing them because that's the practice you're used to. So this, again, is a very simple but hopefully more well-defined version of kind of what DevOps means as a term. Basically, the best way of looking at it is DevOps is understanding first, and it's tools second. DevOps is a philosophy. It is not a technology. And so I do want to note that if your first step into DevOps is to look at a tool, then you might not be looking at DevOps correctly. And to be fair, a lot of companies do that. It's about understanding the problem first and then saying, okay, what are the tools that we can use to solve this problem? Not saying, oh, I just heard about a really cool tool. Maybe that'll solve our problem. That's not really the case here. And I actually am going to exemplify this in our course today. My goal is for the first half of this course to really be just, again, as I said, breaking down DevOps. We're going to go through a lot of different thought experiments. We're going to look at how, again, the philosophy of DevOps is really kind of outlined. And then the second half, we're just going to be programming. So it's going to be fun, but the first part is definitely going to be a little bit of theory and craft theory and philosophy before we get into craft. So let's talk about what exists today, because you can't really know about. Or actually, should I hold really quickly? Do I have any questions or anything like that before I jump into the next section here?
No, you're all good.
Cool. So let's talk about what exists today. There's a lot of things, as I said, that currently exist in DevOps that are not really helpful, and I'm hoping that these things that I exemplify are things that you probably have even seen at your own companies. And these are purely experiences I've gone through myself as well. So this is stuff I've experienced. First off, as I said, and kind of as we started our course, DevOps is poorly defined right now in the industry. Because DevOps is a broad and somewhat abstract concept, it is difficult for companies to define and implement it in a concrete and consistent way. Everybody's got an opinion on it in most regards, and depending on who you talk to, what company you're looking at, or you're talking to, and things like that, the way that they handle DevOps is sometimes entirely different. And there are definitely people who have left one company thinking, oh, I know how this works, I can go somewhere else, and then gone somewhere else and realized that actually the way they did it was incredibly niche. There's no real generalization to what they did, and it's actually didn't probably help you much in your learning process. And I do really think a lot of that is just because it is really poorly defined right now. It really is more of, well, what do you think DevOps is, rather than what we're trying to define it as a ecosphere, I guess. Culture challenges, right? So because DevOps is poorly defined, and essentially because that impacts culture, there are culture shifts that can happen within an organization because of DevOps. And 9 times out of 10, those go nowhere. It can be very challenging for companies to integrate and adopt new things into their practices. And the reality of it is 9 times out of 10, most don't want to. And it's not in the sense that it's not something we'd love to see, but it's more so you have to deal with business. You have to deal with trying to make sure that the rest of the company's on board with you. And culture is hard. Culture is very hard to change, especially if we're talking about a company that's been doing something one way for a very long time. So I, again, can kind of start showing you how these start becoming compounding issues, where because DevOps is poorly defined and because we are, again, as I said before, having culture challenges, we now start dealing with communication issues, right? Basically, a lack of clear communication and collaboration between these teams that can lead to errors. And I guarantee you, each of us here have seen this. A release goes out, somebody didn't communicate something about some common practice that we do, a feature flag didn't get flipped. Got to roll back, you know. As I said, you know, technically, you know, you can solve a problem one way, but there's always human error. There's always going to be human error, and that's what DevOps is focused on solving, the human error, the human side of it. And so if you have this missing communication, yeah, you can find, you know, and another common case is like documentation even. How many of us have dealt with not being able to find documentation on something because specific software are really hard to navigate, or, you know, there wasn't a good organization around, you know, those documentation and things like that? That's DevOps. Like that is a circumstance where DevOps can see that and say, like, okay, how do we fix this? And because of that, right, again, because of the proper definition, because of the culture challenges, because of the missing communication, we get suboptimal solutions, right? And again, because developers and IT professionals may not be working together as efficiently and as effectively, we basically result in suboptimal solutions that do not meet the needs of the business or the end users. And this is also very, very common in DevOps. I would imagine most of us can, you know, say we've seen some part of some infrastructure or something, we've just kind of looked at it and went, what? And it's true, you know, it's probably some type of suboptimal solution that was, you know, half-baked or not fully put together. And because of that, now we're dealing with some type of weird technical debt that we don't really want to have to deal with, right? So where do we begin? And I am going to say, I think Moss from the IT crowd does a pretty good job of describing what DevOps can feel like. So you'll see a few of his GIFs in here. But yeah, you know, I wanted to show you guys first and foremost what exists today, because once you start thinking about what exists today, that's probably how you feel. Just like, okay, well, there's fire around me. Where do we begin? Do we have, I guess I'll pause before we go into the next thing. Do we have any questions or anything like that? No? Cool. Okay. Well, we're going to start from scratch. As I said, I want you to forget what you've seen about DevOps. I want you to forget what you've heard about DevOps. And I want you to forget what you've done with DevOps. I want you to completely just blank your mind of any knowledge that you have preconceiving to it. And I'm going to be honest as well. This is something I had to do before I could start understanding how to become a good DevOps engineer, because I was constantly taking things that I've said, okay, well, what about this? Or okay, what about that? Or things like that, and jumping way too far ahead than I needed to. So starting from scratch is probably going to be the best case scenario here. So if we start from scratch and we take the definition that we had before, well then, what is DevOps, right? What is DevOps in the sense of for us, right? And the goal of it really is to improve the speed and reliability of software releases by automating parts of the software development and deployment process, and by fostering culture of collaboration and experimentation among teams. Now I'm going to pause here really quickly, because one of the biggest things that people will make a mistake of even here is they'll jump on the automation. They won't jump on fostering a culture of collaboration and experimentation among teams. Because of that, if you just do the automation part, you're missing half of the solution, right? This is why it's so crucial to not just create automating parts that help, you know, you click a button faster and move through something faster, but it's also good for your teams to understand what that automation is. It's good for IT or, you know, QA to be able to look at something and say, like, okay, we automate this like this. We're on the same page. We're not confused by what's happening or anything like that. So again, DevOps is two things. It is first collaboration and essentially, you know, a joining of minds. And the second one is programming, which is, you know, the part we all love. So what is it not, right? We said, okay, well, this is what DevOps is. Well, what is it not? It's not a tool or technology. I'm going to say it 5,000 times. It is not a tool or technology. It's not even a job title or job description. I technically am not titled as a DevOps engineer. I am a senior software engineer. I did not want, in all seriousness, to have my title as a DevOps engineer because that doesn't really describe my what I actually represent myself as. I do DevOps. I follow practices and things like that, but it's not a job. It's not a tool, right? And it's not a standalone practice of one thing that you do versus another. It's a whole, again, ecosystem and much other things as well. Again, I'm just going to say it one more time. DevOps is never tools or technologies. And thank you, Moss. It really isn't. If somebody comes up to you in your company and says, hey, we really want to try this out to solve this problem, then you should say, okay, cool, remove the technology and ask yourself if we still have the problem. Right? If we could do that, then we should be able to solve it with almost anything, right? We don't necessarily need that one piece of technology. So again, DevOps is never tools or technologies. It's much more practice and theory and things like that. It's really a philosophy is what I'm trying to say. And again, it's a mindset that emphasizes collaboration, communication, and integration between software and developers teams. So if you're at a company and maybe they're not looking at it as much of a philosophy, that's going to be a barrier you're going to have to hit first. A lot of companies do not fully adapt the philosophy of it. And so because of that not really interest in adaptation of the philosophy, it is so hard to do anything. And this is something that a lot of DevOps engineers have dealt with too, where you want to start, you get into a new company, you see all of the things that you'd like to start changing, and as I said before, they're not drinking the Kool-Aid. So what do? And this is another part of DevOps where it's up to you if you want to sit down and say, okay, let's break this down and figure this out, or let's just keep doing what we've been doing. And that's why you have to define your DevOps, right? We're not just generalizing DevOps here. We're not saying that, again, as I said before, it's something that you can take from one company to another. What you're really doing is you're defining what DevOps means uniquely to you and the company that you work at. Yeah.
So how do you handle that fact of that most places have different understanding of what DevOps is? Right.
The easiest way to handle that different understanding is really just being open-minded, being collaborative. You're gonna, if you go from one company to another, you can't be disruptive unless it has very good intent. And a good example of this is when I even joined the company I work at now, we migrated all of our services from GCP to AWS, and we did it in about 3 months. And we're talking about 60 to 80 services. And think about moving almost 400 people from one platform to another in 3 months. How do you do that, right? Well, you convince them. That's what you do. You sit down and you again break it down, write out a document, figure out ways of getting people to buy into the team. DevOps isn't just programming. It's working with people. It's getting people on your side so that you can do the programming that you want to do. If you don't have that, then that becomes very challenging. And so if you go from one company to another, for example, you want to make a lot of change, that's good. First, you're going to have to get buy-in. First, you're going to have to get comfortable with the people who basically don't want you to break anything. But yeah, once you can get past that, then you can start defining DevOps at the company that you work at. Yeah.
Earlier, I feel like you mentioned something about companies trying to put their own spin on DevOps.
Yep.
And I'm wondering how is that different from defining DevOps for yourself?
Sure. So companies putting a spin on DevOps versus defining it yourself. Most companies try and define DevOps from a marketing perspective. So companies like HashiCorp, AWS even, they're focused on developer tools, developer productivity, and stuff like that. But the prompt is normally very contrasting. So something that you can kind of catch is when you're looking at a product from, again, any of like these big cloud providers or anything like that, they're going to show you one way of solving a specific problem, right? But what we're saying is that we're going to start with the problem first and then figure out the tool to get there. So, you know, when you define DevOps, if it's being defined as a tool that's solving something, then that's where you kind of say, okay, well, is this for me? Like, is this actually the tool we need? And that is, again, what's really kind of challenging about DevOps right now is you know, listen, I love a lot of the companies I've talked about. You know, I mean, HashiCorp is incredible. AWS as well as a lot of other these companies that have like literally said, we see what company or what people are dealing with, let's move quickly. And, you know, that's why Amazon's got like 9,000 different products that solve the same thing, you know. But their hope, and this is what they don't talk about, I think, as much, is that they're trying to like hit your target of your problem. You know what I mean? And if they can do it with this one, then they'll do it with this one. And if they can do it with this one, then they'll do it with that one. They're just going to keep making more tools to solve your problem. Whereas your problem might be quicker solved by just sitting down and, you know, writing it out and being like, okay, cool. So that's I guess the contrast between the two is one will normally be focused on tooling, you know, solving a specific problem, whereas the other one is more focused on like, you know, how do we solve our problem and then find the tool for that. Cool. So I want to introduce something else with defining DevOps, and this is where we're going to kind of start working with some more of theory and things like that. How many of you here have heard the 3 W's of strategy? Okay, yeah. No, it's okay. To be honest with you, I didn't know it either until about 1.5 years ago. And so it's actually a really, really, really powerful tool that DevOps uses, more than programming. And it's mostly used to really figure out if we even want to solve this problem, right? It's, you know, I'm sure we've all been in, you know, discussions or meetings where somebody has said like, hey, let's do this. And you're like, cool, why? Who's this helping? What? Like, why? This solves that problem, or it can solve that problem for you. And the 3 W's of strategy are basically why, what, and who. Why, reasons and motivations behind the strategy, right? What, goals and objectives that the strategy is intended to achieve. And then who, basically the people who are benefiting from this. And so if you start thinking about some of these, even to things that you have at your company, you might be able to start to see what is a little bit more important potentially, and what is potentially a little less important. But together, these 3 W's basically help you to provide a clear understanding of strategy and what it aims to accomplish. And as a matter of fact, you can even use these 3 W's of strategy to throw out whole projects if you want to. Not the first time I've done it. I've definitely had to basically look somebody in the eyes and say, this is really cool. Who does this help? And then they've said, nobody. And then I've said, okay, we'll visit it later, you know? And again, that's also another very serious part about DevOps is focusing on not, you know, spending the company's money or resources on something that doesn't need to be. You're at that level in DevOps where people are looking to you to solving these problems. And so the 3 W's of strategy is actually a really good, helpful tool that can help you with that confidently. So if we take the why, the what, and the who, and then we apply that to DevOps, right? And what we're actually going to do is we're going to try applying it to, say, our own company, right? So we'll do a little bit of a thought experiment here. So why does our company need DevOps, right? To give a few examples, say you don't have DevOps at all. That's a good place to start. Or say you have, you know, very outdated deployment strategies. Maybe you don't even have CI/CD. Maybe you don't have a lot of these things that we've talked about before. That's a good reason to utilize DevOps, is just the simple, we don't have it, you know, or it's not being done well. The next thing, what do we accomplish with it? Well, if we've said we don't have, you know, a lot of automation around things, or a lot of, you know, things in place that are helping us be agile at our company, then we accomplish that, right? We accomplish being able to be more agile by creating automation or doing other things that'll help us get there. And then the final one is, who do we help with DevOps? Well, in this regard, it would probably be most of the company. If you've never had a CI/CD platform before, or it's never been implemented, then that's something that's never saved you guys time before, right? That's something that a company's never been able to, or that company's potentially never been able to utilize. So again, just as a very simple why, what, and who thought experiment there, hopefully that can at least kind of give you an idea. And just to do one more, say, why do we need Kubernetes? Good old why do we need Kubernetes, right? Sure. Well, what do we accomplish with Kubernetes? I'm not going to answer that. I'll let you answer that. But what do we accomplish with Kubernetes? And then who does Kubernetes help, right? Taking those three things and taking them to a company might get you into some interesting arguments, but it can definitely help you with, do we care about using Kubernetes, really? I can guarantee you most companies have not even thought about this, and they're already painstakingly dealing with Kubernetes and things like that, just simply because they didn't ask, well, do we actually need it? And again, I basically just kind of went through what are in these slides here is again, to hopefully help with that rapid and reliable build of software and deployment of it, right? And it's not even that, it's also monitoring it as well. So if you don't have monitoring at your company, cool. That's probably something that you could utilize DevOps with. Again, what do we accomplish with it? We are able to implement and automate, these processes so that we have the ability of empowering our teams to release and iterate on their products quickly and effectively. A big one on this, which is something that probably a lot of people might not think of, is empowering QA. QA, unfortunately, gets thought about, not as much as it really should be. And when you think about what we can accomplish with it, there's a lot of really cool things that just helping out the QA team. I implemented a feature the other day where it just allows the QA team to go into a channel and ask what the deployment statuses are. That's it. Something very simple. But we realized that they were constantly hitting us up. So it was either we constantly let them continue to do that, or we try and solve a problem for that. And again, that's with the same example where QA can be helpful. That's who we're helping, right? We're helping a specific part of the organization or something like that to essentially, solve a problem within the organization. Cool. Any questions?
There was just a comment that I think my company is trying to start up a DevOps team to deploy CI/CD because they have nothing of the sort right now.
Good luck. Good luck. Okay, so we've talked about defining DevOps. Cool. I appreciate you guys still being with me here. Let's talk about standards versus rules. How many here like rules? Anybody in programming? Anybody like rules? Yeah, you like rules? Okay. So more often than not, I have discovered that when you tell a developer that they have a rule, they immediately hate you. Yeah. And so, again, not even talking about programming now, how do we get around that, right? How do I get around a developer yelling, saying, "Oh, why does it got to be like this?" And then you simply go, "Because it's a rule." Changing how you even conversate about things, again, related to culture, can be massively important when trying to make impactful changes at companies. And so what I want to kind of talk about now is, okay, we've defined DevOps, and we have a good idea of at least some of the things we want to do. How do we do it in a way where we're not just stepping over everybody? And I think that first step is going to be implementing standards instead of rules, right? As I said, developers don't like rules. However, they will adhere to standards for the greater good of the product. Most of us, I would hope, will agree that being in an engineering conversation and somebody brings up, well, that's great, but this is for the greater good of the product, or this is something we've all agreed upon. normally that can be a way of saying like, okay, let's keep our guiding star. Let's keep our focus, and it will make it a little easier when you don't want developers to do things that they probably shouldn't do. Rules are normally something that are pretty hot topics. And another thing I think about rules is that are not good is they don't seem like they're bendable. They don't seem like you can change them. And that's not true. If somebody was to come into DevOps and say, hey, we've got this standard, but it's terrible, it's wasting so much of our time, I couldn't argue that. I'd have to sit down and be like, okay, cool. Like, where are we failing? What can we do? Whereas somebody who hears that, oh, well, we do this as a rule, may not even bring it up. They may just say, well, this is how we've done things, and we're going to keep staying it that way. And so, again, I think it's really important to note here that developers don't like rules, but they will adhere to standards. So what are DevOps standards, right? Like what are they actually? They're guidelines, really, or best practices that organizations can follow to implement standards successfully. These standards typically cover areas such as communication, collaboration, and automation, and can help organizations improve their software development process and deliver better products to their customers. To give an example of this, at where I work, we have two different types of releases. We have a 2-week release schedule where every 2 weeks the whole company comes together, which some of us probably can relate to this. The whole company comes together, we get into a Slack channel, and we work for 3 hours, 4 hours to getting our deployment out, essentially. That is a standard that we set. We said, okay, well, every 2 weeks we're going to sit down and we're going to get this deployment out the door. QA is not going to do anything else. They're just going to focus on this. And that is how we do deployments. About 6 months ago or so, we realized that wasn't good. Does anyone have any idea why bringing 300 people together at one time might not be a good idea? It was something we started realizing is like, nights would go until 6 p.m. If any of you guys have ever dealt with late night deployments, same, I've been there. That's a problem, right? Like that's a problem that DevOps can solve. And so what did we do? We decided to implement something called FBR, or what we call our feature-based releases. And so the whole concept of this is essentially that instead of having everyone come together every 2 weeks and basically hate each other, it was better for us to build a system that enabled the developers to deploy on their own. Straight to production if they wanted to. Now, if they break it, that's their fault. But that's a standard that we've set, where we said, okay, well, as DevOps, we will create a flow for you that you can rely on, depend on. If you need to roll back, you have the mechanisms there to do it. But at the end of the day, you can now use this standard of deployment if you want, or you can use this standard of deployment if you want. And we even made it so that technically people can go from the 2-week deployment and then slowly move over to the FBR back and forth. Again, we had to make it so that people were excited about it. There's no reason to build anything if nobody at your company is going to use it, especially with our job. So it was very important to not just build a new flow so that people can easier deploy their software, but it was also really important to build a flow that people were excited about, right? Getting hype around it and things like that. Oh, look how easy it is to just, in our case, it's all powered by Jira, actually. And so you can literally just move a Jira, and then it will simply deploy your thing for you. Again, standards. So let's talk a little bit about each one of the standards. I'm going to give you guys examples on basically where I think you guys can start looking for standards within your company. And hopefully these will be helpful in ways that you can start potentially applying these at your company, maybe if you don't have them. The first one is definitely going to be automation standards. Automating the software development and deployment process using tools such as CI and CD. The main point here is that don't do anything twice. There's no need. Save yourself time. If there's a circumstance where you're spending more than 5 minutes on anything, try and automate it. Try and build CLI tools. Try and make it reproducible a lot easier. But the main point of having automation standards is really about making sure that the things you guys are doing a lot are no longer time consuming within the company. Planning standards. I know this sounds crazy, but having good standards around how you plan things. I don't expect DevOps engineers or people who work in DevOps to be Scrum masters. That's what PMs do. But our main focus is still to even work with them, to sit down and say like, okay, are we on Scrum? Are we on Kanban? How does that work within our infrastructure? Do we have any concerns about that? We have a new massive change coming down the pipeline. Plan for it. You know what I mean? Let's prepare for this. And so having good planning standards is very, very important. Quality standards. Oh my gosh, everybody please listen to this one. Please listen to this one. You have to have quality standards. You have to. Bottom line, if you don't, it's something you should really be talking about at your company. What does quality standards mean? Version control, configuration management, making sure that you have good testing, good ways of auditing your software after it's gone out. This is hands down one of the biggest things that are lacked in software development in general, in my at least my personal opinion. We do not set our quality standards as high as we probably should, which is what introduces a lot of problems later on. And so, again, doing things like version control. Just curious for any of you guys here and in chat, how many of you guys actually use like SymVer versioning with your releases? Anybody, like actually, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3? I knew it. Yeah, it's so uncommon. It really is. Like, unless you're working on a open source project or something like that, right, which is what you imagine, you normally think of, most companies are just using latest, things like that. Mm-hmm.
Are there any books or blogs you recommend that inspired your philosophy on DevOps?
No. I wish there were. I know that there's a article out there which was it's like a white paper on DevOps, and I'm more than welcome to share that. Most of what I have learned truly has been through experience, through luck, and mentorship, actually. As I said, I don't know how many courses are going this route of teaching, because as you might be able to notice, it's a lot to take in. And so, I wouldn't want to steer you in a direction that didn't, help you take good steps forward as a DevOps engineer. There's definitely, again, like some white papers out there, but a lot of it right now, unfortunately, is just marketing. A lot of it really is. So, it is really going to be important, I think, for you to get your confidence, which is why I'm showing what I'm showing. If you're not confident in what you're doing, then you're definitely not doing DevOps, because DevOps is definitely about having that confidence. And again, it may be unique to your experience at your job. It may be unique to somewhere else. But I think that confidence is more important than anything else. Yeah. And yeah, I hope to see more good information out there. The only other thing I can think of that is helpful is like, does anyone here know Kelsey Hightower? He's a very big, very well-known engineer, and he works at Google, but he's basically worked in DevOps for most of his career, from what I can tell. He's a good source of information. I would say looking for people who are willing to, have an honest opinion about it is probably going to be your best bet with finding helpful resources and stuff like that right now. And again, hopefully later it'll get better. And again, just to getting back into the standards here, communication standards. We talked a bit about quality, right? Well, you can't really have quality without good communication. And this is something that I think is also really lacked as well, which is nobody really feels encouraged to talk about anything. DevOps being such a locked door with a locked key. What a lot of engineers even might not realize is, like, I would love to hear your thoughts. You know, I would, because like I can't. You know, I think what you know, a good DevOps, you know, mindset is to basically think that you know nothing, and you know you're basically just constantly learning. And I think that's good in engineering in general, but especially with DevOps when you have so many different types of things that are coming across what you have to deal with. You might be dealing with the front end one day, you might be dealing with the back end the other day, and the worst thing you can do is block that communication with either preconceived notions about things or, oh, well, no, I thought it worked this way. No, it worked. It's just, no, let's just figure out the problem. And so communication is massively important. And that might even mean something as simple as saying, you know, once a week we'll have our team sit down and work together. It might mean that you have other ways of handling that communication, but like if you are at a company right now where you feel like communication is a problem to you, then that's probably something that really needs to be fixed, because it's going to be hard to make any type of impactful or big changes, especially when that communication is lacking. And what's cool is that you can even utilize, you know, standards to improve them. So things like metrics, right? How many here actually use metrics reliably at their companies for things? Okay, okay, gotcha. No worries, yeah. That's another thing that is unfortunately very falling right now in the industry is metrics and data. There's a lot of great companies out there that will tell you, as a, you know, going back to your question of how do I compare the solution to the problem? Great one. You know, there's tons of companies out there right now that'll say, oh, we'll get your data into charts and it'll look great and you'll get alerts. And then it's like, well, what's my data? Okay. That's cool that you've got this cool product, but like, you can't think about it from the tool. You have to think about what kind of data do you care about. As an example, where I work, we use CI/CD for our systems, obviously. And one of the big things we were worried about was time spent just running things, because we have some monoliths that like take forever to do things. And so one of the things that we decided to do was just put in our own trackers for all of our jobs in CI, and then start marking those so that we could simply say, okay, tests are running 5 minutes, builds are running 10 minutes. And there are metrics, not somebody else's. Why would we double those metrics? Because then we can do other things with those metrics. We can alert on those metrics. We can, you know, we could solve our problems with it rather than saying, hey, I'm just going to, you know, lean on what's already there. Cool. Cool. Okay. So that was a lot. That was a lot. I don't know if maybe now might be a good time to take a quick break. If we'd like, we can definitely do that.
Yep, we can. You want 5 minutes or 10 minutes?
We could do like a 5-minute break. If that sounds good to everybody.
Yep, sounds good.
Cool.